So there's more people doing that now than they were 5 years ago. And my hope is 5 years from now, we will have seen an explosion because it's grown dramatically. We as society are not dealing with this fast enough. When you look at the problems, there are projections that we used to be on a curve that to maybe grow the emissions by 4 to 5 degrees. Now we're on maybe we're at 2 to 2.5. We should be at 1.5, shouldn't be more than that. So the good news is we've bent the curve. But no, we haven't bent it enough. And we're already seeing those impacts in the fires and floods and
Mhm.
tornadoes. And that's affecting, again, this is not a theoretical issue. It's affecting people's lives. It's affecting GDP. Some people there's some studies that say this is going to affect 8 to 10% of the GDP in many countries by the 2040s.
You're listening to The Uncertainty Edge, the show about the art and science of moving forward when the path isn't clear. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan. Each episode, I sit down with leaders, advisors, and thinkers to explore how they navigate uncertainty, make better decisions, and stay focused in a world that rarely cooperates. Together, we'll look for the clarity hidden inside uncertainty. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Sivarajan, and welcome to the Uncertainty Edge podcast. Today, I'm joined by Steven Rothstein, Chief Program Officer at Ceres. With over 40 years of experience building transformative organizations, Steven's focus is helping leaders turn climate uncertainty into strategic advantage. At Ceres, he works with companies, investors, and policymakers to develop practical approaches to climate risk management and sustainable capital allocation. As extreme weather events increasingly disrupt supply chains, shift consumer markets, and transform investment landscapes, Stephen's insights on navigating this complex uncertainty couldn't be more relevant for leaders across all sectors. Get ready for a conversation that explores actionable frameworks for turning environmental challenges into organizational resilience and opportunity. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Sam, thank you so much for doing the show and for your time today.
I'm looking forward to it, Stephen. Thank you for joining us. Stephen, your career spans founding roles at Citizens Energy Corporation to currently leadership at Ceres. Can you share what sparked your passion for sustainability and how your perspective on climate uncertainty has evolved throughout your career?
Sure. Yeah. So when I started this work in late 70s, early 80s, climate was seen as a issue for literally the next generation. Well, it's the next generation now. This is no longer an issue just for my kids or my granddaughter. We're seeing fires, floods, tornadoes. So the risks are growing. To give a context, in the 80s, the NOAA said that the United States had $1 billion storm every 3 months. Last year, we had it every 13 days. And the most expensive events 20 years ago was Katrina. Last January, it was the California fires, $250 billion. So the problems have gotten bigger. It's affecting not just property, but human health. A year ago, 500,000 people in the world died because of extreme heat alone. So it's a significant issue, but also the opportunities are growing. In 24, 94% of the new energy added in the United States was renewables, that we're seeing new technologies, new opportunities. So while the problems are bigger, the opportunities are also bigger. So I am more optimistic than ever, despite the challenges.
Well, that's reassuring because I think we only hear bad news, right? And to your point about the good news, the opportunities, some of these developments, we don't hear enough about it. Why why aren't we hearing more about it? Why aren't, for example, companies broadcasting some of these key things that they're doing that are proactive, that are positive, that are actually potentially having an impact, not just on environment, but on investment bottom lines?
Yeah, I guess there's two big factors. First is we live in a society where the news tends to focus on bad news, disasters, the expression of if it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
So, a company taking some proactive step doesn't always get the news. So some of it is the news media, social media, what we're asking for. But part of it also is we live in a society, unfortunately, where the idea of climate change is polarized. We have an administration that says climate change is a hoax. So
Mhm.
companies, what we find overall, it depends on the company, of course, but overall, they are doing what they should be doing long term, but they're just not talking about it. They understand that Mother Nature doesn't know who the president is. But when they're thinking about capital investments for their company and product lines, they're not thinking just the next quarter. They're thinking 3 years, 5 years, 20 years out. And they know these problems are getting bigger and they know the opportunities are getting bigger. So we see lots of examples of companies doing good things, not enough, not fast enough, but they're overall talking about a lot less than they used to.
Well, it's an interesting point you make. And I like that characterization that Mother Nature doesn't care about who the president is or which party is in power. It always struck me that we hear a lot of debate, whataboutisms, that especially in the West, that, well, China and India are the biggest polluters. And so we don't need to do anything because, especially in Canada, we don't need to do anything because whatever we do is going to be minuscule in comparison. I think the two comments, and I'd love your views on it, the two comments I would make on this is number one, we somehow forget on a per capita basis, which I think does make a difference. And number two, to your point about Mother Nature not caring about party, I think Mother Nature doesn't care about geography, right? Climate events are not a localized phenomena that only happens over the countries that are big polluters. It happens globally.
Yeah, I mean, weather moves, smog, when there were big fires in Canada, the northern part of the United States were affected and other places. So it travels. Also, if you look at China, if you look at this, it's estimated there's around 40 different subsectors of renewable energy from blades for windmills and inverters for solar and blades. Of those, roughly 40, in 30 of those areas, China is winning and some by a lot. Like last year, they put more solar up in China last year than the world put up, period. So, yes, they are polluting a lot and there's too much coal and things like that, but they're also leading on green energy, on EVs. All you cared about was this generation jobs, manufacturing, whether you think about Canada, the United States, that we'd be doing more. The United States needs to do more in this area. And we are giving away job opportunities, manufacturing opportunities in those areas and, as you say, on a per capita basis, we create enormous amount of emissions. And there's so many creative technologies from reducing methane from oil companies or from cows, which are a big source of that,
Mhm.
to use of transportation, to low emission, greener steel or cement, to what's happening in the water to conserve water or food or farming. So there's so many creative solutions and that we see. That's what gives me hope and optimism, but we need to scale them up dramatically.
I want to expand a little bit on that conversation that you just had, Stephen, about China, that is dominating so many of the renewable technology markets. And how are North American leaders responding to this competitive challenge? I mean, what we see obviously is the tariffs, for example, on lower cost EV cars, which seems sort of counterintuitive. But what strategies are proving most effective? And what would your stakeholders be seeing and recommending?
That exactly as you said, that we need to think not just for the next quarter, not transactional, but over a longer term. And so being invested in clean technology, but it's also clean technology is in many cases the least expensive technology. In the United States, electricity prices and insurance prices are going up dramatically. And so one of the things we need to do on electricity is having all of the above, including promoting renewables, but where that's not available, looking at other things to look at those and that tariffs can be sometimes short-term areas. The other thing is we think we need to build in the price of carbon, that the products we all use, gasoline or others, society's going to have to pay to clean it up. And we think fundamentally you should build in those costs, build in those externalities.
Hmm.
And then if you do that, you're setting a clear market signal because Ceres, we believe in the market, we believe in the free market as long as there's clear information. And that includes about the externalities as part of that. So and again, there are great examples of that where we're doing that, where the world's doing that, but more needs to be done because we're running out of time.
I think that's a great point, especially about externalities. I think that it's easy to ignore the public cost of things that are we're doing. What is seen to be a low cost option ceases to be so when you're actually incorporating all the externalities that taxpayers are eventually going to have to pay, right? And I think that that may make consumer choice issues a little bit more transparent, but we've got a ways to go yet to incorporate that. At Ceres, Stephen, you work with diverse range of organizations facing this very topic about climate related uncertainty. What common patterns are you seeing in how effective leaders approach these challenges versus those who are struggling to adapt?
It's really companies and regulators that are thinking longer term. Again, if you just think in the United States, the average person who's working, I bet it's a similar number in Canada, I don't know exactly, is going to retire in 26 years. So
Hmm.
they're thinking about products and their pensions and retirements over the next quarter century, not the next quarter. And so when you think about the energy use, so you think about what are the risks over that time and what are the opportunities? The world's spending today, according to the World Economic Forum, around $2 trillion on new and emerging renewable and other technologies. That 2 trillion needs to go to around 4 to 5 trillion. So that's enormous opportunities. And there are lots of ways to make money in that, but also risks. If you're a company that makes spark plugs for cars, well, EVs don't have spark plugs. So how are you thinking about transitioning your technology? Or if you live in an area where there's floods, fires, tornadoes, things like that. So there are what we've found are companies that are thinking about those risks, have good information, sharing that information. And if you look at just the Fortune 500, for example,
Hmm.
study done a few years ago, I think the number's probably higher now, 92% of them had voluntary climate disclosure. So you're already analyzing that information, sharing it. You can't manage what you first can't measure. So
Right.
having the information, sharing it is a critical next step.
Does the whole battle against climate change, does it suffer from a PR problem? And here's what I mean. We're seeing billions and hundreds of billions of dollars being funneled into AI with mixed results and really mixed forecasts of what likely is going to come in any time in the near future. But there doesn't seem to be a problem attracting those kinds of investments, whether it's profitable or not. Why is something like clean energy, clean technology not having the same kind of interest when it is profitable, when it's demonstrably having a more immediate impact?
Yeah. Yes, I think so. First, I think there is a language issue. So, for example, we don't ever talk about ESG because it's environment, social, and governance because people don't know what it means. There was a poll
Mm,
done one of our colleagues last a year or so ago, and 75% of the people don't know what the acronym ESG means. So
mhm.
we kiddingly call it ESG: eggs, grit, and sausage. So yes, there is a PR problem, but part of it is when when you have an administration in Washington that says climate change is a hoax, and is trying to do everything it can to undermine those solutions, that is part of the issue. So yes, there is an issue. And so, for example, the choice of language is important. We talk about the words resiliency more, for example, than climate because people understand about fires, floods, tornadoes. In the last 10 years, 99% of congressional districts in the United States have had some kind of climate emergency, a
Hmm.
fire, flood, or tornado. So that it is affecting everyone, not everyone the same way, not everyone all at the same time. But it's not just areas that you think about, oh, the fires in California, the floods in Florida. It's throughout the area,
Right.
again, whether it be one of the risks or not smoke. So it's affecting folks but you have to talk about it in real terms, how it affects their family, kids, grandkids, and how it affects economics. I'll give you an example. There is more. Everyone is aware in '08 of the banking crisis,
Hmm.
like by subprime housing. Well, there is more risk on bank balance sheets today because of climate by far than there was in '08 because of subprime housing. More risk. So the safety and soundness of the banking industry is at risk. The insurance industry is challenged right now because of climate. There are many other industries that are facing those risks as well. So yes, it is a communications issue, and we all, including Ceres, need to do more and better.
You mentioned something which resonates with me, that you can't manage what you don't measure. On that topic, I think the disclosure landscape is rapidly evolving, right? So we have over
Yes.
almost 40 countries now requiring climate reporting. Beyond compliance, because you can report, it doesn't mean it's changing behavior. So beyond the compliance side of things, how are you seeing organizations that are at the forefront using climate disclosure as a strategic tool for better decision making and risk management? You mentioned banks, insurance companies, perhaps in other sectors. Are there some good role models and examples that you can point to?
Absolutely. So first is um, having that information and the almost 40 countries, the 37 countries that are in various stages of approving climate disclosure, that translates into 60% of the world's GDP. So that's enormous. Then if you add California that has their own California disclosure, and if California was its own country, it'd be the fourth largest economy in the world. So there is an unquenchable thirst for information. I was at a presentation recently and 200 investors in the room, and I said, how many of you think you'd make more money if you had less information? Obviously, no one raised their hands. So they want good information as part of that. And there are countries that are leading, and then there are companies that are leading. For example, that there are many companies, of hundreds, that have a climate transition plan. So it's not just saying where they are today, but then where they're going to get to, where they're going to be in 5, 10, 20 years. Again, it's the same. If you don't know where you want to go, any road will take you there kind of approach. And
Mm.
so they're saying, here's our road to reduce our risk. And that is going to reduce their cost. There are oil companies today. I'll give you an example. You don't think of oil companies as leading, and many of them are not, but there are a few that are working hard to reduce their methane. Methane is many times more dangerous than
Mhm.
CO2. And so if you can reduce the leaks, you're reducing emissions, but you're also reducing your costs. So there are examples like that. But there are examples, again, in heavy industry from steel and cement to farming. We just did a report not long ago on the 50 companies that having the biggest impact on food emissions in the food industry. And we identified lots of best practices. We did another one on water risk, the 70 companies that have the biggest impact on water and what they're doing. We did that report 2 years ago, for example, this water benchmark, and there's great progress. Not enough as we want, but there's progress in the last 2 years. We've done now 5 reports about insurance, US insurers, about 1,700 companies and what they're doing, and we can see progress. So yeah, there are many examples of progress. None of them are fast enough. When I think about my kids or my grandkids, it's not fast enough, but it is progress.
Progress is something, right?
It absolutely is heading in the right direction.
What would you say when we see a lot of cynicism out there that there's more and more greenwashing going on? So taking something, what you talk about as progress, that it's putting lipstick on a pig for some companies and making a bigger deal about it.
So there are absolutely examples of that, and companies have to be careful because in the long run, your brand's going to be affected. But we're very clear about companies that you shouldn't overstate, but don't understate either. Be very fact based, be very science based. Don't say you're going to reduce by X if you don't know, kind of thing. And so there are some examples of that. That gets back to the idea of mandatory disclosure because the more there's a common benchmark, decades and decades ago. The SEC in the United States required audited financial statements for public companies. Before that, people could kind of share whatever they wanted. Then there was a big debate at the time. Oh, that's going to be too complicated. You're going to give competitive information. There aren't enough auditors to do the work, similar to the debate about climate disclosure. Today, we consider that just the rules of the road. And that imagine if you didn't have for public companies an audited balance sheet, an income statement. You wouldn't be able to have that basic information, and that would give less confidence to the marketplace. We think the same thing on climate because it's such a big risk that the more consistent information that will give confidence to the marketplace and will help the economic growth. And part of that is no greenwashing, but also kind of the flip side is we hope we can get to the point where people are not having green hushing, where they're not, talking about the work they're doing because of the political dynamic that we're in right now.
That's a great example, Stephen. I think that's really paints a picture. When you talk about the fact that, yes, we take it for granted now for having gap audited statements and that it's provided, and it's gone from one strength to the one strength. They're now international rules, right, that are commonly accepted instead of just being jurisdictionally. So your point about this being an evolution, I think, is well made, and you're right. I think that we need to start. This is brand new territory. We need to start with having some sort of reporting, some sort of requirement, some sort of mandate. But we shouldn't kid ourselves that that is once and done. That it will need to be improved. We will need to see what's there and who's using the reporting systems appropriately, who is abusing it, and continue to strengthen those disclosures. But to your point, it has to start somewhere, and it looks like we're doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And like there are many things in life that you can't let the perfect get in the way of the good. So like I've now read for several companies their climate disclosure reports, their TCFD, their Task Force for Climate Related Disclosure, maybe 3 or 4 different years in a row, and they've gotten better. It
Mm.
doesn't mean they were evil year one; they just weren't as complete. And so they weren't because climate is one of those areas that affects all the company. It used to be, I'm dating myself, but decades ago, you'd have a quote computer person in your company. If you needed technology, you go to that person. Now everyone has to be a computer person in some way because we all use it as part of our work. Same thing with climate. You can't just have a chief sustainability officer and they sit over in some corner. It has to be built into HR and manufacturing and purchasing and your supply chain and your all your other elements. And that's hard to think about it. So yeah, the first year you're not going to get everything right. And I just, as long as you're working in good faith, you're not lying, you're doing it. And then you say, okay, how can we do more next year? I just talked to a company that very big company, name and they've now done 4 years of their climate disclosure reports. And they said they finish their report, they take a month off to do something, and then they start planning for next year because they have thousands of people in their staff and it is involved with everything you're doing. Again, the supply chain is a perfect example. Their real estate decisions, their what kind of acquisitions they do.
Mm.
It is built in. They don't have a climate risk plan. They have a risk plan that includes climate as part of it.
That's interesting, and I love that treatment that you're talking about. That it's infused and it impacts everybody in the organization. Are you seeing more organizations thinking about this as a holistic issue? Like, as you say, it's not just climate risk, it's risk, but that it infuses downstream, upstream, all functions of their business. Is that a rare type of thinking or is that becoming more common?
It is I wouldn't say it's common, but I'm seeing it grow. So there's more people doing that now than they were 5 years ago. And my hope is 5 years from now, we will have seen an explosion because it's grown dramatically. We as society are not dealing with this fast enough. When you look at the problems, there are projections that we used to be on a curve to maybe grow the emissions by 4 to 5 degrees. Now maybe we're at 2 to 2.5. We should be at 1.5, shouldn't be more than that. So the good news is we've bent the curve, but no, we haven't bent it enough. And we're already seeing those impacts in the fires and floods and
Mhm.
tornadoes. And that's affecting, again, this is not a theoretical issue. It's affecting people's lives. It's affecting GDP. Some people there's some studies that say this is going to affect 8 to 10% of the GDP in many countries by the 2040s.
Well, and I've read reports that things that we're dealing with right now about water shortages or migration trends are only going to be exacerbated as climate events increase, as food shortages increase, as land masses get submerged. Your point
Absolutely.
about technology and investments making a difference, I think, is good on the positive side of the ledger. Let's talk a little bit about the negative side of the ledger. One of the things that, as you say, society is not moving fast enough. I think it requires, or at least some of the proponents of more aggressive action say that we need to have changes in lifestyle and behavior. What do you think about that? And how do you motivate a society to want to do some of those things when they've been resistant so far?
Yeah. First, H.L. Mencken, the writer, once said, for every complex problem, there's a simple answer that's always wrong. So there is no simple answer. Yes, we do have to change. Countries like the US and Canada and others use too much stuff. And we have too much of a throwaway society. And we're not thinking about the long term. And we think about, what we're eating and the lights on and all those things. So yes, there does have to be individual changes. There has to be changes at a corporate level. You have to build in a reusability. So kind of thinking about this. If you think about, again, when I was a kid in society, people didn't really recycle much.
Hmm.
So now
Hmm.
we recycle a lot more. That's a good thing, but we're not anywhere near as much. So I think there needs to be societal changes, but we also need to look at new technology. As I said, there's the cost for solar has come down over 90%, wind over 90%. So we have to continue that curve, get to the masses, and then take other technologies, some like geothermal that have been around for decades and decades and decades, and bring them to a much bigger scale to use those. So there has to be personal changes, there has to be corporate changes. It has to affect communication. Think about pensions. I encourage everybody who's listening, to talk to their bank, talk to their investment manager, talk to their insurer. What are they doing on climate issues? Think about the products they need. Do they really need to buy that, whatever that thing is they're going to buy, or can they reuse it in some way?
Hmm. No, it's great advice. As you say, I think there's lots of investment opportunities, whether it's new technologies, new investments, things that been proven. I suppose it requires a little bit of long-term thinking, whether it is from investors looking to put money in, whether it's companies trying to invest into these strategic initiatives, or governments in terms of wanting to support and perhaps subsidize investments in some of these areas as a long-term investment, both in jobs, but as also in terms of climate certainty. Are we seeing more of that? Are we seeing pockets of, and let's maybe look at it at all levels, at a government level, at a company level, at an individual level. Where are the bright spots around the world that you're seeing through your organization where there are leading stakeholders in each of those levels that are taking long-term proactive action?
So yes, there are. I would say it, as you say, at every level, there are bright spots. There are individuals, there are community groups, there are cities. I live in the city of Boston. Boston's doing a lot on climate. The mayor's been very leaning in on this. The state of Massachusetts is doing a lot on there. And I can give you lots of examples of great things that have happened. There are many states that are real leaders and many countries around the world that are doing great things. There are many companies, but overall, it's not enough. That we have to, in business, they talk about a J curve, kind of going
Hmm.
up,
Hmm.
go slow, 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 and then go fast. We have to go faster on the solutions because Mother Nature is going faster in terms of the problems, and that it will affect. Again, just take the LA fire. So that's going to cost society around $250 billion, but that's an economic cost. Then,
Hmm.
if you think of that's a direct cost, then if you think about the roughly 10,000 people who've lost their homes
Hmm.
and the businesses, and I spent a day touring this. It's just heartbreaking and heartbreaking. Just so many stories. So on the individual, but then it affects the schools. It affects
Hmm.
local businesses. But then there was a side effect where one of the things about in the United States is the municipal bond market has seemed to be very safe and secure. Investing your money in helping a city or town build a school. Well, $70 million of municipal bonds were downgraded in LA because there weren't enough residents to pay the taxes. So the bondholders say, gee, will I get paid back? So
Right.
that's an example that you don't the domino is starting to fall in other areas. You wouldn't think that would be an issue. So while first is the heartbreaking of people who died, people who lost their homes. I know people who haven't lost their homes, but they had so much smoke damage, they can't go back into their home and the emphysema and those issues. So yeah, there are great examples of again, individuals, schools, kids, cities, states, companies, countries that are doing great work and that weren't happening before. But it's not enough. And when you think about what's life going to be like in 2040, 2050, 2060, my granddaughter will be alive in 2100 probably.
Mhm.
I hope she has an amazing life, and I'm worried about what the world's going to be like at 2100.
Percent. And as you mentioned about the costs, for example, of the LA fire, direct and indirect, I think it's a great point that there's a lot of indirect costs that we're not taking into account. But I'm even thinking there's an indirect financial cost to this. I'm assuming that the premiums for home insurance for everybody in California is likely to go up, given that the likelihood of payouts is going to be increased given the frequency of climate events. So it's not just that the payment, the economic cost of replacing these 10,000 homes or whatever that have been replaced, the businesses that have been burnt down, but it's the increased premium cost that is going to be there for the 40 million people in California and other people that the insurance companies are going to pass the higher costs on.
Yeah, well, the insurance issue, there is a crisis now in this, and as you said, but it's not it may have done it, it's already happened, meaning, so the state has a backup plan. There are 39 states in the United States that have state backup plans called FAIR plans if you can't get private insurance. So in California, they did an assessment, and they've added $1 billion. So if you're a California, if you have insurance, you're paying your portion of that $1 billion already, and I think that's going to go up. So there is in insurance, there are two challenges. There is an affordability and availability. There are less people who have private insurance in the United States today than had it 3 years ago. They're using state backup plans because
Really? Wow.
many places that where you just can't get it, or you can't get it at a price that you can afford it. So there's an availability and then affordability. In many cases, it's going up. Nationally, it's going up faster than inflation, but in some cases, it's going up, 300, 400%. I know of cases where people insurance used to be 2 or 3,000, and then next year it's $10,000. I met last Climate Week in New York, a gentleman, nice gentleman who lived on Staten Island, and after Storm Sandy, his insurance, working class individual, went from 2,500, 24,000. He couldn't afford it, so he had to sell his house. Because he couldn't sell it with insurance, he lost $100,000 of value. That was his nest egg. That was his retirement. So he and his wife, their whole rest of their life will be impacted by that. So the insurance issue, there are lots of challenges. Now Ceres has what we call our reimagining insurance plan. We have a 10-point plan to address insurance risk. And there are lots of great examples of companies doing great things, but insurance needs to do more faster.
As you're telling me the story about that individual in Staten Island, I remember talking to friends of mine in Florida, and for them to get home insurance, they have to be replacing their roof like every 5 years or so. It's not even if the roof has got a life of 10, 15, 20 years to get insurance coverage on their home, given the hurricane risks that the insurance companies are requiring more frequent replacement of roofs.
Yes.
So that's an additional cost, as you say, like beyond even if you can afford the higher cost of insurance, you have to be able to also factor in the fact that the costs of maintenance are going to increase as well.
It is. We think that there are also people, society has underpriced the real cost of insurance. And there's some great examples. I'll give you an example. So the state of Alabama started a program, and now it's spread to other states as well. It's called the Fortified Program, where if you live in Hurricane Alley, where you get a lot of hurricanes, and if you fix your roof in a certain way, it's called a fortified, so you can make a stronger roof, then they will give you a 35% reduction in your insurance. 35% reduction in insurance. And what those stronger roofs have led to, they've added 60,000 homes. They've now, Sam, have shown that on average, there's a 60% reduction in damage. So by
Well,
fixing your roof, and there's a state to help with some of it, you can reduce damage that's good for society. So that's an example where if you're an insurer, that's better for profits, you're paying out less. You're for an individual, your premiums are lower, 35%, and better for society. So that's an example of a creative approach. As part of our 10-point insurance plan, one of our points is to have incentive-based rates. That's an example of if you give an incentive to take in that case, a resiliency efforts. There are
mhm.
others for solar and heat pumps and fire protection and many other things. You can help that individual, but also help society.
I like that. Now, Stephen, we talk a lot about uncertainty, and uncertainty creates hesitation because you don't know what to expect, especially when you're talking about all of these great investment opportunities or these new technologies. We don't know how they're going to play out. What practical tools or approaches have you found most effective in helping leaders maintain momentum in the face of uncertainty and make confident decisions despite incomplete climate information?
Yeah, what's that expression? It's hard to predict, particularly when you think about the future. Yeah, I mean, when you run a business, whether it's a small business or a large business, you're making, hundreds or thousands of decisions about the future, and those are all uncertain. And so it is kind of three. First is get facts. We're very fact and science driven.
Hmm.
And there is now a lot of information out there about what technologies work and those kinds of things. Second is that customers want sustainable solutions. They want to work with companies. So talk about these again. Don't overhype what you're doing, but you can build customer loyalty and build market share in those. Looking at these opportunities on those areas, watching what others are doing. I know many companies, for example, 85% of the US insurers do climate disclosure reports. I know many insurers that read each other's reports. They're all public
Mm.
to learn from them. So learn from your competitors and don't, this is probably more personal. I don't take, if you kind of think about a baseball analogy, kind of a grand slam hits all the time, shoot for some singles and doubles. In other words, take incremental steps and then grow from there, walk before you run, whatever analogy you want to use. But also don't be too timid because the world will pass you by, your competitors will pass you by. And that we think of this from a family, what their kids and grandkids, but to have that, you have to have a strong economy. If you don't have solid banks, if you don't, and looking at those areas, a company that is building a building today, I'll just say a data center.
Hmm.
And if I read a report a few months ago that said there are $65 billion of data centers that have held up in permitting because of local opposition. So if you go up front and figure out where am I going to build, where am I going to get the energy, what about water usage, you could actually save time and money because a third of the data centers who are proposed to be built in the United States are built in water shortage areas already, and they need a lot of water. So why build it there? Looking at some other areas. Take steps, be science based, looking at facts, take some, walk before you run, but move forward boldly. And that the market, there are lots of examples where the market will reward you. If you look at long term, any one quarter you can't measure. But if you look over the long term, companies that think about sustainability, they're going to do better. I mean, if I said, I'm going to give you two options, one, a company that thinks about risks and opportunities, and one that doesn't, what
Hmm.
do you think is going to make more money? Obviously, the one that thinks about risks and opportunities, and climate's just one of those areas, not the only, but a area to think about those risks and those opportunities.
I like that. I think you're right. I think it's taking small steps. I talk a lot about that, about the small wins, whether it's in baseball or football or in business. I think that's the winning strategy. I also like your point that look, you can learn from your competitors. We should all be students of what is happening down the street, what is happening around the world, and see what impact that has and what we can learn from it. So I think that's a great suggestion. Stephen, looking ahead, what emerging approaches or innovations in climate risk management do you see gaining traction? And how might they reshape how organizations navigate uncertainty over the next decade?
Well, obviously the use of technology, AI, in the short term, AI is enormous concern because the amount of energy it uses, the amount of water it uses, all of that. They say a simple AI question is like a cup of water or a few cups of water. And if you more you do, but over the long term, just as it has the potential to solve medical issues, it has a problem to solve lots of issues. We use AI. I mentioned before, we look at these 1,700 insurers and their climate reports. So we're only able to analyze them by using that. So looking at using technology, how to use it, be aware of the risks, but also address some of the upsides. Second is society is going to have a lot more information, climate information, transition plans, disclosures. Utilize that and build that into your decisions, whether it be you're an individual consumer and where am I going to buy your products and services, to companies and thinking about your competitors, merger opportunities, information. And third is that assume that the risks are growing. The fires, floods, tornadoes, again, they're getting worse, extreme heat, and build that into your planning. I know a big company, a Fortune 25 company, that if they have a large supplier and one of their big distribution centers in a fire prone or water prone, they make that supplier have a backup facility. They don't do it because it's good. They do it for business. So understanding those risks and those opportunities, again, trillions of dollars of new investment. So whether you're a widget maker or a bank or insurer or whatever financer, there are lots of growth opportunities in these areas. There are also, if I were a young person, the idea of carbon tracking, data, accounting is a burgeoning industry, as an example.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. We can't ignore the risks. They are increasing. But as you point out, I think with additional disclosure, with additional data, with additional information, with additional science, there's also an element of a flywheel effect if we are bold enough to take it, right? I mean, each of these innovations or improvements or data sources gives us more information to kind of build on to take the next big step. So, Stephen, we're coming to the end of our podcast. So I have a few final rapid fire questions for you that I ask all my guests. So number one, professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
Be humble, learn from others, take risks.
Awesome. Agree with every one of them. And number two, what is one practical tip you would offer listeners keen on applying the insights that you shared today?
Ask every business or the major business you work with what they're doing about climate. Go to your insurance company, your bank, your pension holder, your big company, whether you're the products you buy or the company you work for, what are they doing? And then ask them again in a year what they're doing to continue to see what they're doing. That you have a powerful voice, again, as a consumer, as an employee, and that's just for an individual. If you're part of a community group or a religious organization, what do they do? Have they put solar up? What are they about geothermal? What about other things? So think about the areas and don't try to do it all. Just pick a few and go from there. Do a little more and think about your personal practices. How much are you recycling? What are you buying? Are you composting? Those kinds of it.
Great advice. Stephen, this has been a very informative and timely discussion. If listeners want to learn more about you or Ceres, where do they go?
First, thank you very much to you and your listeners and great questions and thoughtful conversation. And Ceres is CERES.org, CERES.org. And my email is srothstein, ROTHSTIN at Ceres.org. And would love to learn from people and see if they want to get involved. And we have dozens and dozens of free reports and webinars and stuff on our website. Encourage people to go to CERES.org.
Great. Stephen, thank you for joining us today on the Uncertainty Edge podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your listeners' attention.
Thank you. You're listening to The Uncertainty Edge, the show. In this episode of The Uncertainty Edge, I spoke with Steven Rothstein, Chief Program Officer at Ceres, about how leaders can turn climate uncertainty into strategic advantage. With over 40 years building transformative sustainability organizations, Steven shared insights on navigating climate risk, disclosure landscapes, and the massive investment opportunities emerging in clean technology. Here are my 3 key takeaways. Number 1, climate risk is financial risk, and the data proves it. Steven emphasized that there's more climate-related risk on bank balance sheets today than there was subprime housing risk in 2008. The insurance industry is already in crisis, with availability and affordability challenges affecting millions. Climate isn't a distant environmental concern. It's a present-day financial stability issue. Leaders who integrate climate metrics into their core risk management frameworks aren't just being responsible, they're protecting their organization's economic viability. Number 2, measure, disclose, and improve, because transparency drives progress. Just as audited financial statements transformed capital markets decades ago,
Climate disclosure is becoming the new baseline for organizational accountability. Stephen highlighted that 37 countries representing 60% of global GDP now require climate reporting, and companies producing transition plans are seeing measurable improvements year over year. The lesson? You can't manage what you don't measure. Start with imperfect disclosure and refine it annually. Progress matters more than perfection. Number 3, ask the right questions. Your voice has power. Whether you're advising clients, managing investments, or running a business, Stephen's practical advice is simple but powerful. Ask every major organization you work with what they're doing about climate. Ask your bank, your insurer, your pension provider, your suppliers. Then ask again next year. Stakeholder pressure from consumers, employees, and investors is one of the most effective drivers of corporate action. Don't underestimate the impact of informed, persistent questions. Stephen reminds us that while the climate challenges ahead are urgent, the opportunities for innovation, growth, and resilience are equally profound. Leaders who navigate this uncertainty with clarity, data, and boldness will not only protect their organizations, they'll position them to thrive in the decades ahead.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Uncertainty Edge. If today's conversation sparked something, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You'll get practical tools, deeper insights, and new episodes every other Tuesday. Please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to the newsletter at theuncertaintyedge.com.